welcome to the show. I'm your host, Sean Lang. Now, I've spent the last several years building and operating a digital agency that's grown well past 50 people, which has shaped how I think about the things that really matter when things start to get complex. Today is a solo episode. We're going to be talking about how, even though if you don't have core values, you can still create a culture of performance. I wanted to talk about this because a big part of what I do with agency owners when I coach them is really help them to ideate and facilitate the creation of their core values to create culture so that we can create an organization, an agency that still carries the founder's values and the values of the agency when the founder is not in the room. And this is really, really critical to actually build a team that you can trust and scale beyond the founder and build a self-managing team. But we don't always have the bandwidth, the time, etc., to create core values. And I know some of you listening think that core values are fluff, and I don't blame you because in many examples, core values are fluff. But let's talk about what we can do as sort of an MVP level without sort of digging into these ideation sessions and, setting aside a lot of, very, very important execution time that you need, but we can still get the value out of something similar to core values. So we're actually not going to be doing core values specifically. We're going to be talking about installing operating principles. These operating principles are based off of very, very strong core values. But I think that in every situation, literally every single situation, agencies need to have these embedded into their culture, either as core values or as very, very explicit operating principles. This is going to be very, very tactical and implementable, and everyone listening should be nodding along, writing this down, and finding ways to implement this in their team right away if you don't already have these. So let's get into it. Operating principles. These are going to be mandatory scaffolding around your team behavior, a minimum standard for how work moves through the agency. And we're going to limit it to 3 because, 3 is just a perfect number. Everybody can remember 3, right? So these are your operating principles. If you don't already have them, 1 is ownership. 2 is bias for action. And 3 is proactive communication. If you can embed these, you will get performance. Now, why does this matter? Well, if you don't have a culture of performance, you're probably already feeling this as having to do constant follow-ups. There's unclear accountability for work, for tasks, for outcomes. There are surprises that show up late after you can do anything about them. There are people on your team that seem to wait for permission rather than just take action. And you feel like you are the project manager for literally everything at the agency. That's not a person problem. That's not a motivation problem. That's an operating system problem, which is why it's so important to install and embed these operating principles. Now, core values, like I said, they're long-term identity work. They're worth doing, but they're going to take time and honesty, and you might not really have that right now. You might not have the bandwidth for that, but you do have the bandwidth to install 3 simple operating principles while you earn the right to then develop those core values. And you're going to find that once you do these operating principles, you're going to want to base your core values off of them. So let's get into principle number 1, ownership. Definition here basically is every meaningful outcome has a single owner, not a committee, not the team. It has to be one name, one person. So what it looks like in practice is there's a single owner per outcome. People bring solutions, not just problems. People report before being asked, and people proactively close loops. So the standard is, if it's important, it has an owner. If you surface a problem, include your proposed next step. Don't just bring the problem. I shouldn't be chasing updates. Updates should be coming to me as the founder. And open loops are silent killers because then nothing gets done. Tactical examples here would be for client onboarding, one owner responsible for the milestone of client is live and confident by, day 7, whatever that is. Or for creative production, you have one owner responsible for the milestone of creative is shipped by Thursday at 3 p.m. Or for reporting, you have one owner responsible for weekly metrics posted by Monday at 10 a.m. Are you noticing a trend here? Are you noticing a pattern? There's an owner. So a coaching script that you can use with your team when anyone is bringing anything to you and you really want to create ownership is you ask the question, who owns this outcome? Or what's your recommended solution? Or when will you update me next without me asking? That's a great one. Give them a deadline, or let them give you a deadline for when they will update you. Or what does done mean and how do we close the loop? And just a pitfall here is if you assign ownership but without authority or without giving them resources, it just becomes blame. Ownership actually has to come from the ability for the team to move things forward. And so actually that goes really nicely into principle number 2, right? Bias for action. Definition here is we don't debate endlessly. We take action, we run tests, we learn, we get feedback, and we adjust. So what this looks like in practice is we test over debate. Imperfect action is always better than delay. Decisions should not be pushed down, and analysis must be time boxed, right? We can't just let analysis take over and then we get analysis paralysis. So the standard things that you can say is if we can test it in 7 days, then we don't need a 3-week debate. Or we value a 70% answer now over a 95% answer next month. Or decisions belong at the lowest competent level, which means you actually want to empower as many of the people on your team to make decisions. It doesn't need to live just with like top leadership. And analysis always has a time constraint or a timer. It's not a blank check for you to spend as much time and as much resources as possible to get the perfect answer. Implementation is very important. So you need to create decision lanes. So define in advance that, the team can decide on X amount of budget or X amount of risk level without approval. And the founder only approves high risk or irreversible decisions. Use a default decision rule. If nobody flags a risk by end of day, then we proceed. And maybe add some time box language as well. You have 30 minutes, only 30 minutes to analyze and propose a next action. We're not just going to get stuck in analysis paralysis. And again, a coaching script you can use with your team is, what's the smallest test that we can run this week? Or what decision can you make without me? Or what would you do if you had to decide this in 10 minutes? Or what's the cost of waiting? And there's always a cost of waiting. So a pitfall here is bias for action without data, without metrics, just becomes chaos. Action has to connect to a measurable outcome, even if that's just a simple proxy metric. So we need information. And again, that flows perfectly into principle number 3, which is proactive communication. Definition of this is we don't hide risk. We don't hide the work. We don't stay silent and hope that it resolves itself. We surface red flags early and we communicate all of the details. So what this looks like in practice, no silent risks, early red flags, weekly metric reporting, and written updates before meetings. The standard is, bad news ages like milk. The earlier we know, the cheaper it is. Or if you think that it might become a problem, it's already become a problem. And this is true. Or if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. It can't just be said offhand in a meeting, then we forget it forever. So minimum system that you need to enforce this, have like a weekly async post for each pod or each team. What are our wins? What are our metrics? 3 to 5 numbers only, not a ton. What are the current risks with severity, current asks and what they need, and priorities for next week. And a rule for meetings is a written update is always required. Otherwise, the meeting gets canceled or shortened. And a script you can use with your team, again, when this comes up, is what's the risk that you're actually not saying out loud right now? What's the earliest signal that we should have noticed but didn't? Post the update first, and then we'll meet. And what metric tells us if this is working or not? And just another pitfall here is if you punish red flags, you will create silence. You have to reward servicing risks early, even if it's inconvenient, and even if learning that risk totally ruined your day. Better now than later when it gets too big to deal with. These are 3 very, very important operating principles. I don't care what your agency does. I don't care what your team culture is. I don't care at all. You need these 3 operating principles. And to review them one more time, they are ownership, bias for action, and proactive communication. And if you are on the journey to building your team culture and making core values, I would strongly suggest you having core values that perfectly dovetail within these, or even making these core values as well, because these will pay back in spades across the entire org, whether this is internal, external, client-facing, marketing, sales, finances, you name it. These 3 operating principles will always serve you well. It will create a culture of performance and forward momentum, and things will just get better. Please do not ignore them. Very, very simple. So simple. So please don't sleep on this short episode that I just gave you. This will transform your agency. Thanks for listening.